Hi, good evening. Once again, it's Thursday. It's 5 o'clock, and I am still the social media director with the American Artists Professional League. I'm John Bandish, and welcome again. Every Thursday, 5 o'clock, we're members of the American Artists Professional League. Today, we've got James, who we're going to be talking with. We're saying hi to Steve. Hey, Steve. Saying hi to everybody. There's James right now weaving in. We're going to get him collecting here for just in a second here. It's been a lot of fun doing this over the course of the last, it's almost been a full year since I've been a part of the board of directors here. It's been an awesome experience. So many great people are doing a lot of things to help everybody out. This initiative was really started to help showcase the board members, and in that respect, it was great that kind of by happenstance that we opened it up to you, the members, and boy, this has just taken off. It's been a blast. I feel really honored and privileged that I get to talk with all of you every week here. It's just so much fun. I hope you get a lot out of it. I know I personally get a lot out of it. And it's just great to share and connect with everybody. We're going to go live, like we said. We don't have any requests. So James, if you just go down to that little camera icon, click that you want to be a part of the video, and we'll get you hooked up to here soon in a little bit. Awesome artists. All of you guys are fantastic, amazing artists. I think one of the fun parts about doing this interview series is learning about everybody's journeys. There's the request. We're going to get and it'll happen nice and fast. It'll be my luck that this time it doesn't. But this has been a lot of fun. There's just so many great stories, and there we are, magic of the internet. Hey,
Hi.
nice to virtually meet you here on the platform. Thank you again for wanting to be a part of all of this. Um, why don't we just kind of jump right into it? Do you want to give a quick introduction to say your name, where you're located at, and how you came to be a member of the American Artists Professional League?
Um, well, hello. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here. My name is James Keul, and I live in Durham, North Carolina. Is it sounding okay on your end? I'm hearing a bit of a reverberation in my phone.
I've got you good
Okay.
here.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I live in Durham, North Carolina now. I'm from the Bay Area in California originally, from Albany, a little town called Albany. And I became aware of the American Artists Professional League when I lived in New York, and I was affiliated with the Salma Gundy Club, and I had an office there for my job, and so we see shows coming through, and I have a lot of friends from the Art Students League who would apply to shows there and whatnot. So that's when I sort of first found out about them.
Oh, awesome! So you've definitely been not just a part of a lot of other sister organizations. You've also been all over the country. So you went to the West Coast. How did you end up coming all the way back to the East Coast?
Well, my dad lives in Durham, and after New York, I was looking to start a family, and so my ex-wife and I moved to Durham to do that, and so I have a son who's 8 now, and it's a great place to raise a family. So that's why I'm here. I also had come initially to study painting, first at SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, and then at the Art Students League in New York.
No, and they're all great schools. I have a friend of mine that went to SCAD, and every time I've driven up and back for shows in Florida this winter, I drive. There's a couple of like really big billboards on 95 right when you're in the Savannah area, and every single time I've texted them when I've had a second. Not while I'm driving, everybody. Not while I'm driving. Just tease them saying, "Hey, man, I'm by your old alma mater," and SCAD's a great school. So is the Art Student League.
Yeah.
So you've been involved with art then really for at least a long while here, right?
Yeah, I've always painted my whole life. I got into it, I guess, at first. I'm realizing now because I'm writing a graphic novel actually about my teen years. When going back through it, that I've been doing this really almost more for mental health than anything my entire life. And I have paintings going back to when I was about 6 years old. That my mom wrote the name, my title for each one, and how old I was when I did it. So yeah, I've been pursuing this pretty much my entire life.
As moms do. My mom has all my kindergarten drawings and everything from then all the way up to now. So that's what moms are supposed to do, right? They're supposed to save all of our awesome drawings and then show us, and then you get that little bit of like a smile slash cringe where you're like, that's so cool.
That's right. Mostly I use those old ones when my son is feeling sort of frustrated with his own drawings. I'll pull them out and say, like, look, I was worse than you were when at your age. So have faith, because at least when he was first starting off, he wanted to just sort of hand me the page and say, here, you draw it, because he didn't have the confidence. But I'm kind of encouraging him
No,
to just go for it.
so we got a bunch of stuff to talk about. One, I mean, I'm a new parent. My son's not quite 1.5. So one, I can relate on that respect because I'm not going to push him into the art space, but if he follows in dad's footsteps, so to speak, and wants to have some kind of amount of creativity, I'm just going to be tickled pink. So I'm going to just be like loving like whatever he wants to do. So and then we're talking about a graphic novel. I would definitely want to touch base with that in a little bit because that's a whole fun component to all of this. So, but let's back up for a second here. So you've always been involved in art. Was it always more interested in like traditional realism, like with us at the AAPL, and the Salmagundi Club has got a wonderful tradition as well. So you're nodding. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, what were some influences for you to get into that? Because we're in the same age range, and I think we both can attest to this type of art was not as well talked about, if you will, especially in art circles. I've definitely been told over the years, you should follow more Jackson Pollock. Don't go the Pennsylvania Impressionists. Don't look at them. Go that route.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, yes, it's definitely something that everybody gets. I think when you're trying to sort of pursue something that I guess people would say has been done before, but that I've always responded. I think since landscape is what got me into painting in the first place. Um, Initially, it was Cezanne and Van Gogh were sort of my two gods back then. But then to sort of tie back in with the graphic novel again, what I'm writing about is I got sent to Western Samoa to this therapeutic program when I was a 16-year-old, and it's a big topic. We don't have to go into that too much. We can, but it's not neither here nor there. But it was very traditional. We were sleeping on floor mats, and I lived there for almost a year. And when I came back, I moved to Vermont, and I had this extremely influential high school art teacher named Bill Darling. And he had studied at the Art Students League in the 70s and under this guy named Frank Mason. And and he was brilliant. I just was so enamored with him and with his work and everything. And we mostly did printmaking, but he, despite having 8 children of his own, would pick me up in the morning and take me to teach me how to paint the landscape before school. In the middle of winter, we would go out and paint landscape at 5 in the morning and catch the sunrise. So it was an amazing mentorship that I got from him. And so as soon as that happened, I just was like, there's no going back. I think the Samoan experience sort of primed me for something a little bit more traditional, I think, in some ways, and structured. And then I just fell into a really fortunate situation where I was really supported to pursue a traditional path.
Wow. So I mean, what a fantastic story and a fantastic like introduction, if you will, into that. I mean, I think I can speak for at least a fair amount of the people that have been on this interview series prior have talked about coming to this type of art, maybe like after figuring out a few other steps along the way, so to speak, to kind of get yourself to this point. But you just sort of delved right in. And you're touching base on something that kind of has a little aspect of the divine almost in the serenity of the landscape, which for me was a personal big influence. Is that something that like you talk about as like a theme, whether it's a very strong apparent theme or just something that like you kind of feel innately? Is there anything of that?
Yes, I would say so. I mean, I wasn't brought up in the church environment at all, but I did. In Samoa, we went to church there, and it was in Samoa, and I didn't understand it, but you still get a sense of the divine from that experience. And I think that coming back from that, I was sort of in a different mind space and more humble and more open to different things. But I don't know that I really considered the idea of divinity or spirituality or anything much until about 5 years ago, to be honest with you. And that's partly also because, side note, my dad, he's retired now, but he taught Old Norse in at a university levels during his career. So it's essentially, it's the Viking sagas, and that is it's like the Greeks before them. I sort of always sort of viewed religion as a just like our modern day version of what they believed, sort of like the Vikings or the Greeks. But I will say that 5 years ago I quit drinking and started going to AA, and it really had a huge impact on my life. And that was when I really sort of opened up a little bit more to the idea of faith and just sort of things that are greater than us. And I, oddly, everybody I've ever studied with, most people I've ever studied painting or art with, are pretty religious people. And I think the art that I do at times while I'm painting it, I'm thinking, wow, it looks very sort of almost biblical at times, or something that's like akin to religious art from the past or something, because it's of that school, I guess you could say. But it's an interesting question.
Well, and I asked this because it's not a question that I normally kind of delve towards and ask, and I don't think you have to have a sense of religion to also have a sense of the divine necessarily. They're not necessarily intertwined. So it's I know it's like a touchy subject, right? What are the things you're never supposed to talk about, right? Politics and religion, right? But I think when you talk about realism and you talk about art and you talk about things like the landscape, seascape. Even the figure too, to an extent, it's almost impossible to not kind of have a bit of that conversation into it. Just based on the interaction that you're having. You're painting something that essentially is beautiful, and then within that beauty, you can start to look at different elements of what the thing actually is, and then how do you perceive it, and then how do you interact with it. One of the most interesting aspects, I think, in my travels. I must have been a Hawaiian in a past life. I fell in love with the aloha culture the first time I set foot on one of the islands. I was also very much drawn to Eddie Aikau, who is a pretty famous Hawaiian in his time. We won't get into all that, but basically, when I got to the North Shore of Oahu, it was sort of a bit of a pilgrimage for me in that respect. And one of the things that I thought was so awesome is that on the North Shore, when it comes to the sunset, everybody stops and they take in the sunset, right? And so there's a highway that goes right along the coastline there, and there's plenty of places for you to just stop over, and you could literally just stop and see people pulling over, people stopping what they're doing. And I mean, not 5, 10 people. I mean, hundreds of people stopping and taking it in, as if to say, I mean, we all know, a sunset seems like it takes a while. It really doesn't, especially if you're trying to paint it. It's moving pretty fast, right? But I thought it touches on that element of the divine as far as just paying respect to something that is beautiful. It's not going to last, right? So there's lots of different qualities you can pick up on that. And when I get a sense, if you will, for people that have an appreciation for that, I like to delve into that because I like that myself. So this is just pure me being a little bit selfish for a second here.
Yeah,
so,
no, it's good. I like hearing your anecdote. Yeah,
but that's
I mean, I think
cool
that
about this
art
interview
is really
series, right? Is like you've got there's those of us that are interested in similar things, so there's some overlap. But then there's people that there's little spot over here where you're like, hey, I'm doing this other really really cool stuff. So as far as any kind of specific landscapes, is there something specific that are drawn to you? Because you were talking about Vermont, but now you live in North Carolina, and there are differences to those landscapes.
sure, yeah. Um, I I mean, I love it all. It's all sort of equal opportunity to me as far as what I choose to paint. I like to be in nature. That's one of the reasons why I like to paint on plein air, just because I like to be out there and doing it. And I've always painted from life. Not so much anymore. I mean, now I do work in the studio from the imagination and from references, but for years, all I would do is paint from life. And I think part of what I like about it is that it's so meditative, and that when you're in nature, you're really in nature, and everything slows down in a way, so much so that animals come by, and you have sightings and things that of animals that normally would never stick around long enough to let you near. But when you're quiet and still, and you're not deemed as a threat, they kind of let you into their world. So I love that aspect of it. But I would say that I've found that over the years, works that have a human element in them are people can connect to a little bit better. Um, and I've sort of, I feel like I've hit a point like of maximum overload of paintings in my possession, to where I just can't just keep going on painting just because it feels good to go out and paint. You know, I like to be a little bit more intentional about it. So I do it occasionally, but I think that to just endlessly paint plein air paintings of nature um, isn't as fulfilling as putting a little bit of like meat on the bone, so to speak, a little bit more into it, even if it's just a broken down truck or something like a human element in it that people can kind of get start a bit of a dialogue with themselves about what's going on in the painting.
No, that's fair. So now, do you approach the plein air work in a similar sense of what you're doing in the studio, or are they dissimilar? Because a plein air painter, I mean, you've got to make very fast decisions, stick with those decisions, and then, depending on how fast you're working, the time of year, the time of day, I mean, your light is changing very quickly. So, do you find that you have different approaches?
No, no, I mean I used to view this as my Achilles heel in a way, was the fact that I always studied either on plein air, or, either plein, like literally in Vermont with this teacher, Bill Darling, painting the landscape, or as things are changing drastically, or else at the Art Students League, I always took classes with people who had 1 week poses. A lot of the classes either have 2 or 3 week poses, and when the student shows would come up, I remember being sort of frustrated because our shows often looked a little bit amateurish or quick study, like sketchy, versus some of the other classes where they'd have 3 weeks to really tickle up all the details. But I've found that after years of this, I've realized that it was I feel like it's a superpower in a way, because you can take all the time you want in the world and tickle it up if you want to, but it's very hard to do it in reverse. And I just love to be able to go out and just respond to things quickly. So although sometimes, yes, I'm a little too quick out at the gates, and I wish I could sort of hold still and ease into it a little bit, it makes for a more exciting paint work and brush work and paint strokes and things, to be able to just really go for it and not be afraid to make mistakes and adjust things over time.
I envy you. I am so slow and methodical when it comes to it. I'm just as and probably more so terrified of moving too fast, because I need time to process everything I'm doing. My brain needs that slow, like, nope. I need to sit down. I do plein air work. I often hate it, but love it at the same time, because it does force you out of that comfort zone, which every once in a while, right? I think we can all agree is a nice thing to have. But at the other point of it, I'm one of those people that if I'm not satisfied with the work, even if I'm not necessarily satisfied with the work, but I felt like I got something, there was just that some kind of aha moment of a color relationship, or something similar, that I'm like, no, I go home miserable. That's just who I am. So you talked about Cezanne and Van Gogh being some of your earlier influences. That means maybe you have somebody now that's more influential to you now.
So after that, I kind of went through a Rembrandt phase, I would say, where he was really the one I would pull a lot of my inspiration from. Um, and just tying into our last topic was about directness and just going for it. Lately I still draw with pencil a lot, but I've often just gone for like micron pens, especially the chisel tipped ones, because there's no erasing and you go for it, and that's that. And so if you make a mark somewhere that you're not happy with, you may just have to kind of factor it in, blend it in, work it into the surrounding areas, and everything gets a little darker around it or something like that. But it forces you to kind of roll with the punches. And and I think I learned that Rembrandt is the guy who really nails that home, because if you look at his etchings and his fearlessness with which he reworks things, and even just the way that the different states develop, you can kind of think about linear work, line work that way, but also painting, such that if you're kind of always moving the ball forward a little bit, and working the whole thing rather than starting in one spot and moving outward, it's always developing. And I find that very interesting. There's a quote by Corot, that's something like, I always start every painting like an infant blowing soap bubbles, always spherical and always complete. And I like that as an analogy, because I think what he meant by that is that he's always sort of working everything throughout. So even if he's not taking it like to the full darkness or richness or edge weight or whatever that he may in the end, he's bringing he starts setting up those value relationships right off the bat. And so at any point, if you were to stop the painting, it would still be complete. It just would be like a maybe like at a higher octave of a piano, if you were to bring it to a piano analogy or whatever, rather than like the full breadth of all the possible values.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've actually not heard that quote, but listening to that, I can kind of laugh and go. I think if you know if you know who you're talking about, that quote actually makes a lot of sense as far as like looking at Corot's work like that. So first off, I mean, these are awesome painters that you're referencing. So if you're out there and you're watching, thank you again for tuning in. Every Thursday, we're coming to you live at 5 o'clock here with the American Artists Professional League with you. Today, we're talking with James. And we've got some comments coming in here, too. I see James is my favorite living artist from Mira KLE Max. So there you go. You've got an awesome supporter right there, which is always super cool, right? So let's kind of like jump on this for a little bit of a second here. So you've got a background from a professional sense working for the Salmagundi Club. So one, you've got access to the building, which is an amazing building. For those of you who are tuning into this live now, thank you again. Or maybe you're watching this on replay. If you've never yet been to the Salmagundi Club up in New York, one, you're missing out. You have to go. It's an amazing, amazing space, right? There's a ton of history there. That bar downstairs in the basement is a super cool spot to hang out at. Every time I've gone up there, I've always just like wanted to sit down, just hang out for a beer and imagine that there's ghosts all around me of other artists. And I'm just like, I'm soaking in all the experiences. That's just me personally.
Well, I knew I was in the right place when I first walked in the doors and I saw George Innes's palette and brushes behind glass right there displayed by the office. So I was like, oh yeah,
that's where you want to be, right? And it's funny because I was taking some pictures for my wife because I was trying to explain to her what it looks like, and she had never been there. And I'm taking pictures of these palettes. She goes, "So they just have like old palettes?" I'm like, "Yes." And it's really cool. Like this was their palette they painted off of. This is so cool.
Yeah.
So you've got a pretty diverse background in a professional sense. And like studying in New York is, it's New York, that there's a reason why it's so amazing. Is there anything kind of in particular that stands out from that educational experience that, for better or for worse, is something that sticks out in your mind a lot? Now, you talked about the high school teacher that was super influential to you. Furthering that, whether it's schooling or working at the Salmagundi Club, is there a particular sort of moment that you can point out as another influential thing that helped kind of really put you onto the path that you're still on?
Well, I would say other than New York was great. Other than the school, the Art Students League was, you couldn't ask for a better place to learn how to paint. SCAD was great, particularly for the conceptual side of things. And it was a great to have, in terms of having the college experience, it was a great choice. But in terms of really learning the craft and everything, the Art Students League was absolutely phenomenal. I think that looking back on it, one of the things that I think about is sort of some of the in-house politics that were at play, where the Frank Mason class was sort of viewed as like the ye old master class, and wake up and get with the times, people, that kind of thing. But then you have like Dinnerstein and some of the other ones that are like Geno, which are more realistic. And then you've got abstract classrooms and conceptual art ones where people are kind of looking at each other like, oh, I don't know about this group or that group, whatever. And then you leave and you realize how small of a place it is and how we're all like, it's not a singular sized pie, the larger the pie, even if you get a smaller slice of it, it still plays to everybody's benefit. And I really think that everybody at the Art Students League is phenomenal. They all have their merits, and even though we all did different things, I think that it's worth remembering that we're all kind of in this together. But the other thing I I'd say is that being in New York and working for different artists was extremely helpful. There's only so much you can learn in a school setting. Riding around the subway and just endlessly drawing people sleeping on the subway was my big pastime. I did that, like, filled volumes and volumes of sketchbooks that way. But I worked for this guy Richard Haas, who's a muralist and printmaker. He actually just had a show that just came down at the Century Club in New York, and I was his assistant for about 6 years, and worked for a sculptor named Laurie Goulet, who was an instructor at the Art Students League, and I was the instructor, the monitor and assistant to Frank Mason for a number of years as well. I'm actually the co-executor of the Frank Mason estate, and I'm the only person of all of his years of teaching, only student of his who he let work on his surfaces doing restoration.
Oh, wow.
In his later years. So when in his later years, and then after he passed away, just getting the collection in order, I learned a lot just from sort of having such exposure to them and really examining them in such a close fashion. That was extremely helpful.
So we've got a couple of comments too. Nate has said, you are such a great painter. Look at the pedigree on this guy. He's asking what's next for you. And I would agree. I mean, you've got all the credentials that you could hope for. And one aspect to doing this interview series that I didn't anticipate doing or having this be like a component to this was being able to facilitate a learning for either a younger person or somebody who maybe is coming out of like their professional career and they have a second career as an artist, but using this as a resource of learning, saying, how did you get to where you're at? And this is wonderful because you're a perfect example of somebody that said, hey, I went to New York and what I did was not just go to school. And it's not to say that school is bad. I'm not trying to imply that. So anybody out there that says John hates, the college programs, that's not the case. I'm just saying that I think there's other aspects of learning about being a professional that you can get by working with another professional, with or for, and and your experience is a really perfect example of that. So if you're out there and you're younger and you're listening to this, there's one aspect. Not every artist has the financial ability to be able to take you on as an employee per se, but it's certainly worth the effort and time to seek those people out. And unfortunately, the reality is you're going to find more of that in the big cities: Chicago, Philly, LA, New York. But look where you're at. You're down in Durham. So for anybody that's out there, maybe in that Raleigh area, if you're willing to drive over, maybe James could be your mentor. So there you go, right?
Absolutely.
So, there's an interesting question to that is, if you were to have somebody walk up to you right now that's a high school kid and say, I want to be a professional artist, what should I do? What advice would you give them?
Well, I always advise taking classes somewhere like either the arts. It doesn't have to be the Art Students League. If you are in New York or you happen to be aspiring to take it that far and go live in the city, I think that's a great place to do it. But there are other places you can do that. You can study with individual artists. You can study with me, teach at the Durham Arts Council. And I'm starting up a Zoom atelier online. So there's and you can actually take classes through the Art Students League online. They're e-atelier, they call it. There's lots of different ways that you can tap in for not too much money to get really, really good education, like technical sort of art principle education. I just think, I mean, although I'm grateful that I was able to go to SCAD and I feel like it's a wonderful school and there's a lot to get from that, it is a lot of money, and the prospects of coming out and being able to pay the student loans off right away are slim. So it is a thing that I would say is worth considering really hard and deciding whether it's worth going to that much debt when you can actually, you don't have to make it your career, at least not at first. Like, I've always known that this is what I want to do, and it's partly because of my sort of troubled youth period, whatever, in Samoa and all that. It's like, by the time I got back, I'm like, if I even make it, I've made it this far, and if I'm even going to go to college, I'm going to study what I want to study and like pursue this thing that I'm passionate about, because I'm just happy to be where I am at this point, But I think that it's you don't want to saddle yourself with all that debt, and and then not even be able to really pursue it because you're working all this time anyways. Whereas you can be sort of learning it on your own while um, doing other things, on your journey. Hopefully they're art adjacent and not going to zap your creativity so much that there is a fine line. I think at first you can learn a lot from an internship or from working for another artist as their assistant or something. But when it gets to the point where you're not learning as much anymore and it's actually stealing all of your own creativity and you don't have anything left for yourself when you get home, it may be time to sort of shift to something else at that point.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just saying this the other night to somebody that had approached me with the same question, and I was giving roughly the same answer. If it was me that was poof magically 18 years old again, what would I do differently? And if I was to go to a university program, I was saying to them, I still, my alma mater is Tyler School of Art, part of Temple University in Philly. One of the aspects of going to a bigger school that had an art school within it was that I had the ability to take courses outside of the art space, the art school, like business courses. And if I could go back in time, that's exactly what I would do. Instead of wasting my time taking, swimming 101 or, whatever the case may be, whatever the electives, I would have went and taken those and learned all the aspects of being a business in that way, because you have to pay your taxes. Just because you're an artist, the government doesn't care. The IRS is looking for their money from you people. So
Yeah,
death and taxes, you're not escaping any of that. So
that's true. One other thing I'll add to that, though, is that I spent a lot of time in New York really focused on my own technical journey. Like I really wanted to, I feel like there was this sort of perceived finish line that I wanted to cross. And it's like, it didn't matter what all through SCAD, it was like, give this up. What you said before about some getting flack about painting the way you painted is, kind of resonates because when I was in SCAD, I remember I had a teacher in one of my last classes there as a senior, where I'd done these big landscapes with power plants. Kind of nothing much has changed. I'm still doing the same kind of thing, really. But it was like the Savannah Wildlife Refuge with these paper mills in the background and this juxtaposition against nature. And I brought them in, and they were big. And I brought them in. My teacher said, God, they look like Constable. I hate Constable. And I just thought that was so funny because it's not like Constable is my favorite artist in the world, but I was like, geez, I'm like I'm 22 years old or whatever. Like, that's pretty good if I can paint something that reminds you of Constable. I mean, to me, it was like he meant it as an insult, but it was almost a compliment, kind of.
if somebody
But
told
anyways,
that to me now, I put it as a feather in my cap and say thank you very much.
yeah. Well, but that said, I think that you do have one should be aware of these things. Like I just sort of rejected even considering the conceptual side of it really for a long time, and certainly not like worrying about what was being done in the art world, the contemporary art world, which is very different from my view on it now. I think it's important to stay in touch with what's going on, the different trends and stuff. And so, yeah, I feel like I probably could have focused more on making connections and things earlier on in New York versus this like endless pursuit of technical excellence. Because first of all, you don't even know. It's hard to judge it on your own. It's very subjective. And I don't know. I remember when I was in Vermont in 2008, I was up there substitute teaching at my old high school. My old teacher, Bill Darling, came back and I'd done a self-portrait in his studio. And when he came back, he saw it and he's like, he slapped me on the back. He's like, you'll never be a better artist than you are now. And I was like, oh man, burn, like, ouch. Cause I didn't think I was really embarrassed by it. And I just was like, God, I have so far to go. But I think what he meant was, and this is the way he taught, he wouldn't necessarily answer things. You didn't necessarily ask the question. You'd kind of like let it slowly make sense later. And I really think what he meant was that, yeah, there isn't a finish line. Like you're just as good. You maybe over time you will continue to get better probably if you keep doing it, but there's no time like the present in some ways to get started on the other sides of the art career business, including making connections and forming community and that sort of thing.
Well, dare I say it's a balancing act, right? Because I mean, I feel like we're talking about something that I feel very akin to myself because I can sit there and say, if there was a way to mess up making connections, I figured out how to do it twice, and both times were the best. But like I was always on the journey of like I wanted to be better. I wanted to learn. I wanted to grow. I was more of like a rudderless ship myself, as far as I didn't know have like a particular direction, or at least I didn't think that I did. And I look back now, and all the signs were there. I was just kind of a little too dumb to be able to put all the pieces together to make the puzzle, so to speak, right? But I think what you're saying is a balancing act, like make connections, but also pursue that ever elusive, I want to be the best that I can be aspect of being you, the artist, and I think there's equal amounts of both of those aspects of being the business side and the creative side of art. You need to have a balancing act of those, right? And even if you don't have it yourself, you're out there listening. One thing that I know it sounds kind of silly to say this, right? But find somebody that can help you, right? My wife is in the house. I'm outside of my studio space in a separate building that I built, and she's watching this, and I guarantee you she's rolling her eyes because that's what every great wife does for their husband. They but she's been like there for me, and in the business side of things when I didn't know what I was doing. She's a business major, so when I have questions, I was able to go to her. And I'm saying this as in, whether it's a spouse, a friend, a family member, whatever the case may be, I feel like find the resources however you can find them, right? And that's been my experience. That's my advice that I
I think
was
that's good
giving out.
advice. Yeah, don't wait. Don't not let it happen because you don't excel at that particular area. Everyone has their areas that they excel in, and I'm just now starting to learn that lesson the hard way. But I am starting to wake up to it and say, okay, these are the areas that I'm not so good at. Maybe I can actually ask for help in those
Yeah,
areas,
and don't be
and not try to.
afraid. I right that's one aspect. I was just saying this to young high school kids, saying, there's great success in being humble and saying, I don't know how to do that. I'm not very good at that. I need to find somebody that can either teach me and I can learn, or I can use them as a resource and for a fee of some type, have them do this for me. I mean, when you put your trust in somebody, that you got to be careful on that aspect, right? But I think there's equal parts to all of that. We're getting close to actually about an hour, which is fun. I've always intended these to be about 20, 30 minutes because most people's attention spans are that of like a goldfish these days. Everyone's clicking off. But I have a couple of other questions. So as long as you're willing to go for another couple more minutes,
Sure.
is that okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. So one question that I absolutely love asking, and I'm really curious to hear who this could be for you, is imagine that language barriers don't exist. Everybody can speak the same language, whatever. Is there any one person from all of art history you could sit down, have dinner, cup of coffee, cocktail, whatever the case may be, breakfast, doesn't matter. If you could have one person you could sit down and have a talk with, who would it be? And if so, why?
I mean, that's a tricky one because there's so many people I would love to pick the brains about for like either technical reasons or other reasons. But I sort of feel like you go far back enough, and even though I would love to know like what Rubens used in his medium or so and so used in their medium or whatever, I feel like I don't know that it's more relevant to be someone a little bit more recent. Um, and I'm just going to go out on a limb and say Frank Vincent Dumond, who was the teacher of many people, but also of my teacher Frank Mason. And he partly because he's a brilliant artist, but also just the time that he lived. I mean, I could ask him to dig some dirt on Frank when he was young and that kind of thing, which would be kind of fun to hear. But the not that there isn't plenty of it from other people through the years later, but but he grew up. He met Corot. Speaking of Corot, he met Corot in his later years. He went to the Académie Julian in Paris in the 1880s. He apparently his palette, which is called the prismatic palette, is a derivative of Whistler's palette. And so the time frame that he lived, and then he became an American Impressionist and was friends with Twatchman and helped found the Old Lyme Art Academy in Connecticut. So he knew, like, he was rubbing shoulders with all these titans of early 20th century American art, Ashcan School, you name it. But he also was there for the Belle Epoque in Paris, and I just feel like he would have a lot of interesting things to say.
You know that you can't argue with that. I think I love asking this question because everybody gives answers that either I'm completely not expecting, or their rationales for the why are just really interesting in and of themselves. I mean, you're right. Like somebody that's got ties to the Ashcan School and La Belle Park. I mean, right off the bat, you're like, wow, well, okay, well, you're bridging some like awesome things. You know, how did that happen? How did you manage to sit there and find yourself, you know, running in all these different circles? That's cool.
Yeah,
Uh, what fun anecdotes of history are, you know, potentially lost, not knowing, you know, how or why.
definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
so kind of along those lines, right? So it's another fun question to point out, and it's really just kind of it was a question that was asked to me once, and initially I had thought, no, I pretty much don't think so. And then I realized actually there might be one or two. Um, have you ever painted something that you are just never willing to part with? It's not even about a sum of money. It just means way too much for you in some particular way. And if there is a reason and you're willing to share it, what would that reason be?
There's Well, so there are only two that really come to mind. One of them is a painting I did. I did a copy at the Met. Well, I did a couple copies at the Met of Rembrandt's. One is the woman with a pink, and the other is man with a magnifying glass, which is the pendant piece. And when I was leaving with the woman with the pink, which is the better of the two, the other one I went back in the studio and reworked the face, and his nose is all messed up, so that one's banished to the like back of my storage unit. But the other one turned out pretty well, and someone offered to buy it as I was leaving, walking out of the Met with it, and I was like, nope, it's not for sale. And he kept like, he's like, well, you name the price. It's like I probably could have asked some ridiculous amount for it, but I refused because I had learned a lot from the process of painting it, and I wasn't ready to do it now. Now I probably would let it go, but at the time it just seemed like, why would I do that? Also, the only other copy I had done before then was of a Van Eyck painting of a man in a red turban at SCAD, and I was so proud of it. I spent like hundreds of hours meticulously tickling it up with like a single hair brush, and I was so thrilled with it. And it got stolen during an exhibition. And although the school paid me for it, I never signed it. There's no identifying thing, and I lost it forever. So I feel like it's always nagged me that I had learned all these lessons from the process of copying it, and then it was gone, and so I was unable to like continue to learn from it through the years by looking at it, if that makes
Oh,
sense.
oh man, so like that's never happened to me and I've never I mean other than like the some of the great stories you hear of art being stolen, I've never actually you know met someone who's had their work stolen before. So one, I'm sorry to hear that that happened. Two, you know, I feel like there's going to be a documentary in like 60 years when somebody comes across this awesome painting and they're like, what is this? And there's going to be some anecdotal evidence that it'll be traced back, right? There's some kind of fantastical story to that. You know, so speaking of stealing art, I hate to kind of bridge on that because to me it's a sore subject to you like that. But uh, what are your thoughts on? Are you familiar with probably the greatest art heist of all time in Boston? Are you familiar? Because it's Rembrandt.
Yeah,
Uh,
his only seascape.
who do you think did it?
I know they say it's like Serbian gangsters. It was like the most recent tip to the FBI. There's a $5 million. I think there's still a $5 million like hotline out for this for information that leads to the finding of them. But I don't know. The last I heard, it was narrowed down to some sort of sort of Eastern European gangs. Do you have a
Can you
theory?
imagine that right now? I mean, that to me is the story of the century. If and when they figure out where the paintings ended up and who did it, I'm I had my wife who was not familiar with that. There was a documentary I think on Hulu or Netflix, I forget which one, that she watched it and went, "Wow, this is like the perfect crime. When did this happen?" She's like, "It happened all those years ago and they still don't know." Like, yeah, that's really. It's I hate to say that it's really cool because it's stealing art, which is terrible, but you know it's still kind of a neat story, right? It's fantastical.
Well, hopefully they find them. My worry is that they're not around because they're so hot. They've never been able to sell them or get rid of them. So, you worry that out of desperation they would like destroy them or something. Let's hope
Yeah,
that
and
that doesn't
I've
happen.
thought about that, and the only thing I've thought of is that whoever stole them wanted them, so they're in some very very private, highly secured space that nobody's ever going to find for 100 years or something. So we're coming up to just about an hour here. So one of the aspects to the interview series that I like to be able to do is to give you the floor, so to speak, here at the end, to tell people where they can see more of your work at. Do you have any upcoming shows? You talked about that you're about to start an online atelier. What information do you want to give to people? You have a website, obviously. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. And I would, I guess, say that first I'd like to announce that I have a show that's coming down in a month, but it's been up since January. It's my first solo museum exhibition, and it is at the Waterworks Visual Arts Center in Salisbury, North Carolina. It's all climate change related works that are, many of them are, well, a number of them are quite large, like 11, one is 11 feet tall. And one of them is a piece that I did a while back, but it was, let's see, oh yeah, I have a little card of it. It's this one. It's been cropped here a little bit at the bottom, unfortunately, but it's, this is a painting I did about sort of sea level rise. It's 10 feet by 6 feet, 6 feet high, 10 feet wide. And it was featured in the Fifth National Climate Assessment, which is a report that was mandated by Congress that basically takes information from all these different siloed governmental agencies and puts it in a report that gets sent to the White House and to Congress. And this is the first year that art has been included in that. And so that's very exciting. I have a show that opens, it's through the Durham Art Guild and the School for Living Futures. And that is a 3-person show. It was a speculative art show. There was a call for submissions issued, and I'm one of the 3 artists who are doing it. And it's a solar punk inspired show about, so it's climate change related, but it's non-dystopian climate change related, thinking about sort of future ideas about the future relating to water. And that opens this coming Saturday, not this Saturday, the 11th. And then I have a solo show coming up this fall at the Art Guild as well. So lots of work ahead to be created.
I was going to say 3 solo shows coming up is definitely a lot. Wow. Congratulations on being featured in something that's going to the highest levels of the federal government. That's an awesome feather in your cap, to say the least. And to talk about, something we were literally started the conversation about art, aspects of the divine, and then the landscape. Trying to preserve the landscape is a fantastic endeavor to begin with. So that's awesome. My hat is off to you. So people can see more of those works there. If you happen to be traveling or you live in the North Carolina area, you have a website as well, and you're here on Instagram.
Yes, it's James Keul, JamesKeul.com is my website. And JKEUL is my handle here on Instagram. And of course, if you are in the area, certainly check out the show in Salisbury or look me up. Send me an email or shoot me a message on Instagram, I guess.
We'll have all of those linked in the description and or in the comments as well below here for everybody. And I am fairly confident to say that I'm sure that we will have your work in an American Artist Professional League show upcoming.
Yes.
I can't wait to see it in person at the next Grand National Exhibition at the Salem Lagoon Club, which you're absolutely familiar with. So I'm sure we'll see your work there. James, it's been my pleasure to have you come on here and have a great talk. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you, John. Nice to talk with you.
And I will be talking with everybody else next Thursday, 5 o'clock, same bat time, same bat channel. Have a wonderful afternoon and evening, everybody, and we'll see everybody soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.